Hey, welcome back. In this mini lecture, I'm going to be discussing Richard Carney's article, Autocracies That Look Like Democracies Are a Threat Across the Globe. Sort of the major question to think about is, can democracies defend themselves against aggressive regimes? So a bit of a context, I'm going to sort of introduce a little bit of Francis Fukuyama's iconic work, The End of History and the Last Man. In it, he argues that the liberal democracy is the endpoint for government forms, and he demonstrates as proof the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of communist rule in the USSR. Ultimately, from this, and in terms of this article, is Fukuyama's provocative prediction still true today? And autocracies that look like democracies are a threat across the globe. Richard Carney looks at authoritarian regimes that seem like democracies, but are in fact not so much. Here he revisits the elements of democracies and autocracies and lets us distinguish countries that pretend to be more democratic than they really are. Here I'm going to discuss a little bit autocracies, and they're also alternatively thought of or named authoritarian regimes. The benevolent conduct by autocratic countries can change into aggressive and politically charged behavior. These autocracies normally maintain power through centralized control over information resources. Political opposition is either forbidden or strongly curtailed, and individual freedom is limited by the state. So again, these are some characteristics of autocracies. Here, Carney talks about a couple of major characteristics of autocracies that look like democracies, with their sort of posture towards elections and capitalism. First, they have this thing like pseudo-elections. Here, leaders permit political opponents to run for elections, but they rarely win, so it seems like more of a show. Secondly, they have pseudo-capitalism. So they have capitalist systems, and they have features of Western democracies in the way that they have capitalism, but they usually use these capitalism, the systems, to further their own authoritarian rule. The reason that this Carney's article is so important is that autocracies across the world have increased over time. Around Cold War's end, approximately 13% of countries had authoritarian regimes. This compares to about 33% of all countries today in these various regions like Africa, Middle East, Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Americas, and prominent countries like Malaysia, Russia, Singapore, Turkey, and Venezuela. So again, it's been increasing over the past several years. In terms of the way they control politics, they have a democratic veneer, as kind of was talked about earlier on. They attempt to target political opponents. Again, this sort of expounds the idea and sort of brings it into more detail. So that was brought up before about elections. This veneer democracy permits opponents to run for elections. So it looks again like an election. But the rulers who are incumbent that are already ruling, they often target the political dissidents, and they often take aggressive action towards enemies to bolster their own support. For an example of this, Russia's Vladimir Putin faced unprecedented citizen protests during the 2012 presidential election that continued into 2013. In response, in terms of LGBTQ rights, in terms of political control, Putin punished various protesters. He had new laws prescribed. They prescribed draconian punishments for acts of dissent. He embraced a new, sharply conservative rhetoric, dismissing the urban protesters as traitors and blasphemers and enemies of Russia. So again, that's one way to exert control. Another is, again, the Russian Putin context, is its foreign influence. Russia's foreign activities have become more belligerent than during the Soviet period, in fact. And an example of this is the 2014 Crimean annexation by Putin. And in response to this, his approval ratings by Russians skyrocketed. This isn't just for Russia, it's also in other contexts like Turkey and Erdogan. Here there was domestic political dissidents were repressed. Erdogan repressed domestic political dissidents following a failed 2016 coup, where he arrested more than 110,000 officials, such as judges, teachers, police, and civil servants. So there's a broader repression that's going on. Still, again, in Turkey and Erdogan. He actually even exerted control beyond Turkey's borders. For example, Erdogan allegedly orchestrated a plot to kidnap opposition leader Fethullah Gulen from Pennsylvania, as well. If you're into the NBA, Turkish NBA star Enes Freedom Kanter declined a 2019 trip to London because he feared Turkish spies might kill him. There's also information is controlled through various legal and financial systems that are exploited. The dominant party of these authoritarian regimes, they exploit Western legal and financial systems against critical media, Western media outlets. For example, they try to avoid attack, and they use censorship. Traditionally, in the past, these autocratic regimes controlled information and resources to retain power, and they relied on hostile attacks or outright censorship. More again, it's been a shift where they now use legal and financial methods regarded as legitimate by the West, such as to sue or buy the media, to again sort of achieve these same ends by different means. One example is in Singapore. The Lee family had some lawsuits. The Lee family was autocratic Singaporean rulers, and they sued for political and financial reporting after the 2008 global financial crisis. They alleged coverage about them defamed them. As a result, they targeted foreign news organizations like The Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and The Economist. This also extended into Malaysia. Then they deployed similar tactics as you saw in Singapore. This occurred, the time frame was after the 1997 Asian financial crisis, but before the 1999 general election. Again, they targeted foreign journalists and media organizations by filing defamation suits against the Asian edition of the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones. Again, the filers who did this are the wealthy ruling party's supporters in Malaysia. So again, to support the incumbents. This also occurred in Russia, where they also took advantage of Western legal financial systems. They used various disinformation campaigns to exploit free speech protections. This includes foreign media company ownership, where Russian companies acquired ownership stakes in foreign media companies to influence operations. Then they did this to influence media. First, there was manipulation of media coverage, and secondly, there's a reduction in foreign country media freedoms. In some, they help to control various forms of information. They also control resources through state-controlled businesses by the dominant party and authoritarian regimes. State-controlled businesses often comply with international financial regulations purely to help them access Western corporate and financial systems. Again, these autocratic leaders pursue political objectives with less scrutiny under the cover of legitimate business operations. So it makes them seem more legitimate than in fact they might be. I'll give you a couple contexts. One is in Malaysia, where they had one MDB. It's a state-owned investment fund that engaged in aggressive investment tactics with corrupt practices. The U.S. accused former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak's family friend of masterminding the theft of $2 billion from the fund. Financial capital channeled to politicians and projects to help the ruling party win the 2013 elections. Another example is in the Russian context, where you have Russian state-linked companies which helped influence Hungary, Serbia, and Bulgaria's energy sectors via purchases of ownership stakes in these companies, in various companies. Russia accessed other sectors, including finance and telecommunications. As a result, Russia was able to influence governmental policies. Another resource control example is the Russian-Serbian context, where there are EU sanctions against Russia. The Serbian government did not enforce EU's Russia sanctions to help Russia, but there was a risk for Serbia because they wanted to qualify for 2025 EU membership. In short, by supporting Russia, it worked against their application for EU membership. A fourth resource control is the 2016 US election, where there's very bold Russian interference. Russian-controlled agencies and businesses played a strategically vital role in US election interference. This is demonstrated by foreign US ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who told the US Senate that never before had the Kremlin violated US sovereignty so illegally, aggressively, and audaciously, even during the Cold War. But there's attempts to resist this influence and defend democracy, according to the book, the Kremlin Playbook, which was an extensive study of Russian influence in Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Latvia, and Serbia, Policy recommendations help to resist Russian influences can also be applied to other dominant party authoritarian regimes. Here are 5 policy recommendations from the Kremlin playbook. 1, strengthen intelligence gathering. 2, strengthen cooperation between the U.S. and its allies. 3, increase U.S. ally assistance to vulnerable countries. 4, protect or enforce transparency measures. And 5, monitor strength the ruling party's hold on power. In summary, if you want to defend democracy and resist the influence of autocracies, the Russia attack on the 2016 U.S. election is demonstrative. Even a country that's big in scale like Russia, but not as powerful as many other countries, that it can interfere destructively in the world's most powerful democracy. You can expect other global autocracies to follow suit. That was a discussion of Richard Carney's Autocracies that look like democracies or a threat across the globe. Thanks for watching. Take care.